So pápáid roimh gach éine chuig an ócáid fíor speisialta seo the Law Internationalta na Mná. You're very, very welcome, everybody, to this very special occasion celebrating International Women's Day. And the reason we're all here, of course, is because Mary Burke has created this wonderful exhibition at home on the farm. To mark the occasion, we've gathered a group of people who, in one way or another, and in keeping with the theme of International Women's Day, have chosen to challenge in their own lives, in their art lives, and in their farming lives. So we're looking forward to a really interesting and engaging discussion during the course of the next 45 minutes or so, chaired by Ella McSweeney. So thanks everybody for coming along. This is one event in a number of events that we have brought together to encourage people to take a look at the three magnificent exhibitions which are currently on show at Limerick City Gallery of Art. So do take a look on the gallery pages. There are walks and talks and poetry and all sorts of delights to keep you engaged. But most of all, do take a look at the show. So without further ado, I'd like to hand you over to Ella McSweeney, who's our host for today. So over to you, Ella.
Thanks, Liz. Thanks so much. And hello, everyone. Happy International Women's Day. It's just brilliant, and I'm delighted to be here with you for the next hour or so to listen to these amazing people that we have lined up to talk a little bit, as Liz said, about land and being a woman of the land and creativity and the challenges and the joys of it all. And so what we're going to do is very briefly, I'm going to ask everyone to introduce themselves and sort of set the scene of where they are in the world, in Ireland, and the landscape around them. So we have Mary Burke, the artist, Sheila Flanagan, Lisa Fingleton, Breda Larkin, and we're hopeful that we also have broadband problems aside, we also have June Danaher down in Limerick. So if June can pop in at some stage, we'll be delighted to bring her in. But starting with you, Breda, where are you? And tell us a little bit about you.
Hi, how's everyone? Happy International Women's Day. I'm in East Galway near Aughrim, the Battle of Aughrim in 1691. I wasn't there, I was in the bog that day, so I missed it. But I'm an artist and a comedian and a farmer working with my father on the family farm. It's about 100-acre beef suckler farm. I'm doing the green cert at the moment. So I'm transitioning really into a more holistic type of farm, and something that will, I've been with Talamh Bio now. It's a farm organization, learning how to do micro dairies, different things like that, so I can move to the next into the next generation really of farming. So I'm quite active in politics and with the farm activists Talamh Bio, and I've done some comedy like The Land is on Drugs. I've been doing that for Galway 2020, and I did a song about native trees called Annie Oaks. Because of the 3% native trees in Ireland, I decided I'd write a rap about highlighting that fact. So that's a bit about myself anyway here in Galway.
It's a great piece of work as well. Can you just briefly, Breda, just describe the landscape around you? I mean, you're so lucky to have 100 acres. Just describe it for all of us who aren't there.
Well, yeah, it's the Larkins at the forge. Like I'm like the sixth generation on the land. So there were blacksmiths, and they were able to buy farmland then in the turn of the century when the land recession, when they were acquiring land. And I suppose it's a old type country. It's the old road from Portumna to Ballinasloe, so it's quite small farmers there, a lot of sheep farmers, a lot of hedgerows still intact. So it's really, I feel like it's a different type of farming that needs to happen around here. More, I feel is more feminine based. A little different type of maybe chicken farming, and smaller industries like seed saving and stuff like that would probably go a long way, because there's not that many people farming around the block in the area. So it's a lot of old trees. We've got a lot of old ash trees here, and so it's quite remote, but not. It's only 8 miles from Ballinasloe, so it's not totally remote, but it's quiet anyway. Yeah.
Gorgeous. And we're going to go down now to Kerry and Lisa Fingleton. Lisa, how are you doing?
Hello, how are you all from Ballybunion? So I'm here on our land is Barnadarrig, And like Breda said, my partner, Rena Blake, her family were here for 5 generations. So I'm married in. I'm married to a Kerry woman. So I suppose the land is very special to us because of the generations and all it has gone through. So it's ironic, actually. We do have the little stone walls that are now covered with moss and ferns. The land itself is called Barnadarrig. So it was the Red Gap. And we reckon it was called the Red Gap because of the hawthorn trees that line the road. So we're certified organic with the Irish Organic Association. So it's mainly horticulture that we would do organic vegetables. We started the Ballybunion Community Market with another local farmer, a grower, Leah Farm. And I suppose art and creativity is very important to us. My partner's a photographer. I'm a visual artist and filmmaker. And I've just finished an amazing course called Haumea, which is on eco-literacy. And I suppose that really inspired me with Kathy Fitzgerald, because that's talking about eco-social art practice and how important it is that as artists we engage our creativity with the big issues like climate change and biodiversity loss. And my focus for the last couple of years has been on food and the fact that we're importing so much of our food. And I'd written a book called The Local Food Project. And more, I suppose, I'm looking at the bigger connections again from food, even though food is huge. And last year we planted 10,000 native trees in Ireland, and we're looking forward to seeing those develop over the years. And we do have a native woodland as well. So that's probably enough for now. Thank you.
Just in case people missed that, because your audio went in and out there, you planted 10,000 trees last year.
10,000. Maybe it's better if I talk the mic or the thing at the headphones. Is that better?
Yeah, no, it just dropped out just at the point where you said 10,000. So
we planted 10,000 native trees here. Yeah. So, fantastic. Yeah, so it's beautiful. Yeah, it's very special.
I mean, it's just amazing. Sheila, where's Sheila? Sheila Flanagan.
Hello.
Hello.
How are you all? Happy International Women's Day, everybody. I want to thank Limerick City Gallery of Art for inviting me onto the panel. And I just want to say a quick thing. Mary Burke, your paintings are amazing. So really incredible. So thanks a million. I enjoyed watching them and I look forward to hopefully visiting in person in the gallery. So I'm an artist, activist, creative ecologist, and all sorts of other things. And dreamer in particular as well, and mischief maker betimes. So I'm based in Newbridge, Northeast Galway, and I'm not really a farmer like the other women, but so I'll have to put my hand up to say I'm not a farmer, but I live in a rural community, and I created a space where I live called the Art Farm. So I'm into the idea of farming practices like cultivation and nourish and growth and all those words related to farming. And I'm also very conscious of my practice in recent years has more or less concentrated on the area around me and the townlands around me, and watching changing farming practices, watching forestry cover in my local area, bog, all river pollution and river status and catchments. So I'm kind of doing a psychogeographic mapping of my local area and trying to map how I can, with my art practice, raise awareness of issues locally. I don't know what else to say about it.
No, that's great, and it gives a really great overview of your work. And I just meant to say also to everyone watching that please drop in any questions or comments you have into the chat box as you're watching, if you've anything you want to ask the panelists or anything you want to say yourself. Mary Burke, how are you? And as Sheila said, your work is astonishing. People can actually, if they want, log on to, is it limerickgallery.ie now, and they can see your work up there?
I think it's limerickgallerypages.com.
Okay. Limerick Gallery Pages, so people can see, as we're talking, they can see your work, because it really helps to kind of understand where you're coming from. Just tell us a little bit about you, Mary.
I'm in suburban Dublin. I'm living in Goatstown, in the house that I grew up in. and my studio is 30 feet from my back door. And that, I suppose, has been taken over by Limerick. I've felt for the last 2 years, every time I step outside my back door, I was stepping into East and West Limerick as I built up the paintings around me. I suppose, in the past, well, I might have been known more for painting my own immediate suburban surroundings, and on a project a few years ago, I was asked to do a series of portraits of homes in Stradbally in County Laois, and believe it or not, that led me to thinking about doing farms, because once I got out of the suburbs and into a small rural town, the next step, the next logical step for me was maybe a little bit more rural. And then when Una McCarthy asked me to put in a proposal for the gallery, I said, what about farms? And the result is in the gallery at the moment. Don't know if there's anything else really to say.
Just on that, I mean, why did you decide to do farms?
Well, farming, I think, in my own ancestry, there were farmers in Tipperary, Cork, and Waterford. I think it's something that, even though I'm a sort of more a suburban dweller rather than a city dweller, I think probably most people in Ireland have connections, whether they know or they don't know, they are connected to the land. We're not that far removed from it. And I wanted to look at it not in the sort of idealistic, pretty landscape. It's these are working farms, and I suppose I just wanted to investigate another side of life that I didn't know that much about. I had a feeling that we're possibly on a sort of a change. There's a lot of challenges for farmers. So this was an opportunity for me to go out and meet 5 fascinating farmers, all very different from one another in terms of large, small, the various practices. And in fact, one of the farmers, June Danaher, I think, was supposed to be here today. A fascinating woman and fascinating farm. So it was really, as with my earlier work, it's not really that much of a difference. I was just trying to get a slice of life in 2019, a slice of rural life, farming life in East and West County Limerick. And luckily, before COVID, before any of the lockdown, I managed to complete all the farm visits. And that meant I was able to then, in 2020, just devote myself to making the paintings. So,
and Mary, we could dwell for a long time on this question, but without wanting to be too simplistic about it, can you give your overall impressions of what you made of the farms that you visited, and some of the big sort of thoughts that you had about your time on them?
Well, a number of things. One thing that really, I suppose, surprised me was I saw a lot of links between farming and art, which I hadn't thought I would. And the main link was passion. Each of the farmers that I met was passionate about what they do. It's not a job, it's a passion. It is a job, but it's a passion as well. They love their farms, they love their animals, they're proud of their heritage. In most cases, it was multi-generational. And at the same time, they work extremely hard for probably not a huge material return, huge financial return. And that just resonated. I was listening to all these, I mean, I was uplifted by each farm visit, just at the enthusiasm and the pride and the duty of care for the animals. And I was just thinking, this passion, this is what I experience as an artist. And it seems it really resonated with me in that way. The farms were all very different. But I even had a situation. One farmer was talking about the subtle color of his grass. He said it looked like a blue green, and I was thinking, I know that he was probably thinking of it more from a science point perspective, but I was thinking artists talk about subtle different types of greens, different types of colors, and here I've got a farmer who's seeing this. So a lot of unexpected surprises. I was uplifted by every visit. I just thought one was better than the next, and it was just the passion. That's what struck me more than anything.
And Lisa, I mean, you were saying like you married into a farm, so I suppose you have the opportunity, a kind of really lucky opportunity to see it from both sides. Yeah. You kind of have a window into that world, that generational world of the kind of relationship between people and the land, and then also you have your own perspective just from your own personal life before you did that. And I just wonder about that question about to a certain extent about creativity and the role that creativity plays in farming in general, or could play in farming.
It's funny. I grew up on a farm, so I've always lived in a farm. But I suppose that the change for me was moving to a farm in Kerry, and I also grew up with creativity, which is really interesting because my dad and my mother used to make everything. So my mother made all our clothes and toys, and my dad made my first bicycle. So I always thought the two things ran together. It's really interesting. And I suppose the funny thing, the challenge for me then was I went back and I studied fine art. And for, I don't know why, I thought that I had to leave the art behind then when I came here to be farming. And I kind of separated the two because I thought farming can be quite overwhelming, and looking after the animals or vegetables or everything can really take over. And I suppose that's why I mentioned that course that I've just done on eco-literacy, because it was about being an artist and being of the land. So my project this week, as opposed to sitting in the studio and painting and drawing, yes, I brought out a sketchbook and I was sketching, but my project this week was to make a looped walk. So it would be a lived experience for people when they come to the land. Do you know that, like, an expanded idea of what art is? I think that's what I was searching for a long time, was how could I, like, we have people doing art projects here and artists come and residency and different things. But I was starting to separate out my art from my farming life. And I think what I've realized in the last couple of months is that, no, they're all so interconnected. And as Mary said so beautifully there, the passion and the color. And, we try to create, because we've bees now, and I'm trying to think in terms of color for the bees. How much can we grow on the land so that when the bees come out of their hive, that there's something for them to eat all over the land? And it is like creating an artwork, a 20-acre artwork, and it's just beautiful.
Greta, yeah. You're nodding there, I can see. Just off
mute. You're beautiful.
I'm nodding there because the bees, it was one of kind of a breakthrough in our farm. We got Daddy a beehive for his 70th birthday, and it's sort of a knock-on effect because he actually turned out his grandfather kept bees, and so starting to make links between the old generation and now, starting to, not just new generation, but actually kind of turning the clock back a little bit. But what you're talking about there, the color and everything. So I was becoming very passionate about keeping go. I was asking Daddy, like, what did it look like when you took the farm over 60 years? Was there a hedgerow there? What was there? So it does become almost like you're resculpting the land again, and so it becomes much more exciting, I think. And like, none of us really. I have 5 girls in the house. I'm the only one interested in farming as such. I did the Green Circus just because I felt like it was the right thing to do, and because a lot of us have turned away from the farm and stuff because it seems a little bit, boring, or it's uninspiring or something. So I think this way, connecting art or connecting your own interests with the land makes it more exciting. So that's why I was kind of nodding there.
And you said something earlier, Breda, about this idea of feminine-based farming, and it seems appropriate today to kind of talk a little bit about that. And then can you just explain a bit what you mean by that? I suppose, is it possible to look at the landscape and look at a farm and see something different in terms of if depending on who's been there and who's been in control of it? Yeah,
because I would think that the women in culture, I feel like the family farm is really women are really wrapped in the family farm. because the invisible farmer, we'll talk about that later, but it's I feel like the feminine, it's more business to me, a profit, the exponential growth is very male in my perspective. It's I feel, because social farming, so they're keeping the farm together, keeping the family together, keeping your, the local enterprises going. I would say it's more female, just in what I've been learning about community and things like that. I feel like the system we're in farming is quite patriarchal, so I feel like it needs a bit of a balance. So that's why I would say maybe different type of animal husbandry, keeping bees, putting in hedgerows, maybe putting a few different crops, growing crops. I mean, before, like, growing up on the farm, our farm, we all grew our own food. So, but that was important because my mother and father were there at home. So it is.
That change being a recent change. So you're in some ways saying a generation before the last generation, it was like that. There was more of a balance in terms of how we worked the land, and women had more of a role. But we're kind of in a system now that isn't allowing that, or it isn't the case, or other things are more important.
Yeah, because there's very few full-time farmers. Anyway, in Ballinasloe, I think there's only 8 full-time farmers in the whole town. And there's a good few hundred farmers, so it changes the whole family dynamic, I think, though. So I think it is. I think that, the business side is probably replacing business with culture. So I kind of, for the Land is on Drugs, I like to talk about putting the culture back in agriculture, because we seem to be losing it. Because certainly when I grew up on the farm, that was my culture. Everyone I connected with, and I think all of us, Mary commented on it, we're not too far removed from that being our culture, especially rural people. So I feel like with the loss of farms to big, if you become bigger farms, less farmers, we'll lose a lot in a society, in our own rural culture, basically.
Do you recognise that, Sheila?
I wreck my head thinking about these issues, to be honest. I never stop thinking about them. And hearing what Breda says, first of all, regarding the feminism, both my grandparents, my mother and father, would both speak about how their mothers were fundamental to the running of their farms. And my father would speak about his mother told her husband, his father, what to do. And the same with my mother's mother in Kerry, by the way. So Lisa, she was kind of she.
We've lost Sheila there. Is she there? Mary, it's interesting to pick up on what Sheila said, and one person I must say every International Women's Day I think of is Hilda Tweed.
That lineage of farming. In relation to,
missed you there. You just dropped out.
Oh, sorry. No, just a strong woman element in my parents' background regarding farming. Just in relation to what Breda said about people making a living on the farms, I think, and I walk around my area and I'm looking at biodiversity loss or hedgerow loss, or also feeling any big scheme I come up with, thinking I'm going to solve something, how will that then be affect my neighbours? So it's all small farms around me, and I'm very conscious of my neighbours in that area and our kind of ecosystem. And I think maybe we the broader public as consumers, in paying the proper price for product, we're constantly, we pay to, and I wouldn't earn a lot of money, I wouldn't be a well-off person, but we don't pay the proper value to vegetables, food created on the farm. So how can any farm exist unless it's the model of agribusiness? Because they almost have to go that way, because the consumer, all of us, and on International Women's Day, every woman in the country that's going to the supermarket buying produce, we really, men and women, everyone, we have to alter that consumer type process and support organic farming or support a different system.
There's an interesting question that's come through, and do you think that women farmers have more agency now than previous generations? And I suppose from everything that's been said so far, the impression is that women in the past had more of a role in shaping the land and shaping the farm. But I wonder if that's the case or not.
I think that the bigger issue is that we're in systems of food production that are unsustainable. So I think it's really interesting when you were talking about, your generations breathed before. Like, I've done a lot of workshops with children doing the local food project, and I always say to them, do you grow food? And they're like, no. Did your parents grow food? A little bit. And did your grandparents grow food? Everybody grew food. So we've changed so much in 2 generations that the knowledge that was there is slipping away from us all. So I think we need to. It's difficult. There have, like, in my family, my grandmother made the butter, my grandmother did everything on the farm as well. But I think it's the bigger systems that need to change, and that's why I think organisations like Talamh Bio are so important, that are talking about changing the food systems, because at the end of the day, whether it's women or men running farms, and we're doubling our herd number or we're polluting the land, the gender is irrelevant in some ways unless we change the system. Like, I always say to people, you wouldn't hand up a bowl of chemicals to someone and ask them to eat it. And yes, that's what we're expecting people to do. The system has to change on its system change, I suppose, as they say. That irrelevant to gender.
I presume is a broader representation of people, of players in the system.
Absolutely, more voices, more diverse voices, is so key. For change. Yeah.
Mary, can you talk a bit about your impressions, I suppose, from the outside looking in terms of the role of women on the farms that you visited?
Well, now, one of the farms I visited was actually a retired farmer. It was Dan Brown, who didn't have anybody to hand the farm over to. The one, I suppose, then there was June Danaher, who we've already spoken about, who actually ran the farm. And I'm not sure, I don't think her husband was involved in running it. She was actually running the farm single-handedly, as far as I know. And the other farms were, I think, much more, well, maybe male orientated, but one of the farmers, he was actually one of the bigger farmers, John McNamara, his daughter was helping. I mean, he had his daughter, who was, I think, 10, and his son, who was 12, were out helping with the milking. So I don't think there was a gender split there. It was seen as, that they're all sort of involved, and they all felt they had a stake in it. But it was one of the things when we were selecting the farms that I would visit. I knew that I could only cope with about 5 farms, because of just they would be so rich in themselves. And discussing this with Una, it was very important to have female representation. There had to be at least, and it wasn't by any means a token, there had to be at very least 1 woman farmer out of that 5, even though we weren't trying to say, and I certainly wouldn't be qualified to say that what I have done is representative of farms in County Limerick. It is 5 individuals, but within that, it was absolutely imperative that at least one would be a woman. And that's, as I said, I couldn't say that it's representative, because I simply wouldn't have the knowledge to know the entire diversity was only 5 individuals.
I suppose, Breda, you mentioned this idea of the kind of invisibility of women in farming. And I just wonder, like, at what stage do they become invisible? Because I've spent 20 years going onto farms, and I've always felt that there's a whole range of issues that on farm that you hear about repeatedly that not necessarily are reflected in broader policy or broader media kind of discussions. And where does that invisibility begin? Because, as we've heard, women on the farm still do an awful lot. June Danaher saying the sort of absolute heroes and hidden backbone of the farm still today.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting question. I suppose I think visible farm, like the farmers don't, like, who nourishes the farmer? A lot of male farmers come in and they have the dinner on the table and stuff like that. It's different for a female farmer. There are some uh, differences there, and so I suppose it has been a patriarchal system. Like, I mean, like, it's handed over to the boy, let's say, and even in our house, I sadly, like, my only brother passed away like 22 years ago. So it's been a real interesting conversations with my father for the last couple of years and how we can, you know, deal with that. And I feel like for me, it's more like Larkin's. I'd like to name the farm. I see there's a Larkin's farm here, Larkin's Hill Farm. I always wanted to name ours too, Larkin's. That's Forge, so you can carry on the name that way. So it's about, maybe changing, but so women have been made invisible, I feel like, by that sort of patriarch, the sort of old-fashioned thinking. I don't know if people agree, but it's changing. I feel like we're on a tipping point, because you need farmers this stage. You need anyone who's passionate about it should be encouraged. And I feel like the invisible woman is, we all know that. I mean, my mother was there the whole time raising the kids, and she was growing the food, and it was a partnership. And I feel like it's become like, this idea that, big tractor now and you get all your stuff, it's become very individual or something, and it's just kind of competitive and different things like that, when it really should be.
So is it the case, for the first time, if you inherit the farm, for the first time ever, the land will be in the ownership of a woman?
Yes, in a way, but I suppose people, because I always joke that my four sisters, and I'm the only one that didn't get married. Like, I was like, of course, Daddy loves me because I have too much land to get married. So I think that's the feeling, is like bringing women onto the farm and changing the name and stuff like that. It's, I feel so. Yeah, it would be the first time, even though the Larkins all had the land, they acquired it for different. It was kind of between families, really. It so happened that a lot of the farms that did actually ended up having bachelors, and now actually they don't know what to do with the land, really. It's supposed to go to nephews and things. So I think it should be a much more emphasis on keeping a farm together, whether it be husband and wife or brother and sister or cousins or whatever. Like more of a collective thing would be better, I think.
And Sheila, I mean, at the end of the day as well, with rural depopulation and the reduction in the number of farmers in Ireland, actually there's an imperative just to keep anyone on the land, isn't there?
I suppose I observe around me that out of, say, 5 or 6 of my neighbours, I don't see their children continuing on their farms. And I often look, following articles or following programs on, is there any, even I was looking at the IFA site and Teagasc site, and I was thinking, is there any conversation around, even in townlands or local areas, of what do you see this landscape looking like in 2050? Because, say, where I am, and I'm on 2 acres, and I'm surrounded on 3 sides by forestry. And I think if no one follows in my neighbours' farms, then we're all going to be surrounded by forestry, and that landscape is no more. And I think there's great sadness in that, because each story holds, or each field holds a story. And there's a well covered in the field in front of me by forestry, or there's there's a history and a folklore and a richness beyond money, I suppose, all in local areas. So I would love, I think through my art practice now, I'm kind of completely focusing on maybe making small films and trying to create conversations of what do we see in front of us. And as a local community and a town, individual townlands, can we have a say in what the picture will look like in the future? And that we're not just acting as individuals, that one farm gets sold off, or one farm, one at a time, that it's not about farm ownership, it's about land guardianship, and no more than biodiversity, that it's all interconnected. So my neighbour and we're all interconnected. So anyway, I don't know where any of this will go, but I look forward to, I will be starting the conversations, and I will be doing a mapping of the area and see, can we have a say as a community rather than individual little pockets.
And just before I go to Lisa, Sheila, when you do that, do you think that you are going to get a big response? Do you think there is a huge thirst and appetite for those conversations now, given the challenges that we face with all of the things that we know are difficult in the sort of, dystopian future that in some ways we face with climate change and biodiversity loss and all the other things that we know? Do you think that there is a real desire for those conversations to happen?
I'm not sure, to be honest. I desire it. I'm not sure do my neighbours desire it, but I think in small, like we'd have a group water scheme. So if we use the model of the group water scheme as a model of, this is a core number of houses, and this could be, can we be sustainable? Can that run on other power than mains electric power, and our water quality? And if rather than introducing the big topics, that it's kind of small topics at a time, that okay, can we have a conversation around water quality, and then can we have a conversation around encroaching forestry, and not like we can't just solve it all in one go. So I try and tackle little bits at a time and kind of baby steps, to be honest.
And Lisa, rather, I suppose where creativity comes in is in using the imagination to imagine these futures. So when Sheila says, what kind of landscape do we want in 2050? It is creativity that can help us imagine that, because at the moment I get a strong sense, food and farm policy is such a contested space, and there may be an argument that there's a failure of imagination about the options that is ahead for us.
Yeah, no, I absolutely, I was nodding away as everyone was speaking, and I think that is the power of art. I always think it's magic. You have a blank canvas or a blank page and there's nothing there, and then you can create something. And I think that's what I think has been really hard with COVID, almost the artist being silenced. There's no concerts, there's no way to express yourself except online. And I think artists have a crucial role in this. And I think that's really exciting. And I think I have great hope. I mean, I think people are looking for a vision. And unfortunately, the vision that we were sold in the past destroyed our soils, destroyed rivers, and has caused huge problems for the people who are most vulnerable around the world and most, likely to be victims from climate change events. So I think people are looking for a vision, and it's a really good time to come forward with new visions for farming. And I see people all the time coming around here in North Kerry, young families moving back to land, and it's really, really exciting. There was an interview on Radio Kerry there last year, and they said that 60% of farmers had nobody to leave their land to. So I think we need to move in here and say, look, here's a new vision for ways that we can live on the land. So diversification, we're involved in social farming here. So we have people with disabilities coming to the farm. We'd love to have asylum seekers, refugees coming here, and it just energizes the land. When we have social farming here, the place is buzzing. And there's maybe way too much tea drank and apple tarts made, and you wouldn't even get a bite of them because we'd all be tucking into them. But it brings an energy, and I think that that's really, really exciting. And the native woodland brings energy. All those trees here, we had a little, like a dance party, Brady, you would have loved it, welcoming the trees. And I just think it's like, because we have been based on models around capitalisms and patriarchy, but even if you're just talking finance, an acre of organic vegetables brings in more income than anything else, apparently. So, we need to start being realistic about it, that there is great opportunities there. And there's the NOTS courses now, the National Organic Training Skills, the SkillsNet courses that are at the minute. Like, they're interviewing farmers, men and women who are making a living and supporting their families. And it's really, really exciting. And I think the more that we have these conversations and those kind of visionary kind of conversations, because we're all stuck in COVID and pandemic, and it's upsetting. And I think the more we can have positive pictures going forward and seeing, well, how can we work with this beautiful land? We have soil and we have rain that most parts of the world would literally, they'd trade gold for. And I think we need to use our land more positively and embrace what we have to create the world that we want, you know.
Rita, can you talk a bit, for people who haven't seen your rapping, can you talk a bit about that? It's amazing, and I think it also uses humour to drive a point home too, in a very creative way. But just talk a bit about what it is and the process behind it, and what I suppose you were hoping to achieve with it.
Well, yeah, because I did drama course and did comedy. I've been stand-up comedian for a few years now, and I suppose when I did hear about the native woodland with 3% native trees, and learned a lot more about forestry. I Save Leitrim campaign. I went up there and chatted to a few of them up, and I suppose it just kind of came naturally. I used to have a load of acorns in my pocket, and I'd be going around the festival just giving people an acorn. I'd be like, any oaks, any that's where the idea came from at a festival. I was like, maybe I could do a song. So it just kind of, and then my comedy partner, Laura Lavelle, so we just kind of bounced off each other and got someone, and I got some funding from Galway 2020, so I was able to go to a music producer and actually, get it down on, he produced it for me. So that was, it helped have a bit of cash to push it into. So that's how it kind of came about,
But what were you really fundamentally trying to get at there? Because it's a clever piece of work. It's very funny. It's brilliantly done. I really encourage everyone to go and
thank you.
But there was a deeper, quite clear point, wasn't there?
Well, I suppose an inspiration came from my friend who's really into horticulture and permaculture, and she's a herbalist. I'd be going for a walk with her in the forest, and I'd say, the trees are lovely, aren't she? She goes, you wouldn't say the people are lovely. They have names, and you don't just name them. And she taught me. I wouldn't go. It was so stressful going for a walk with her because I'd have to know every tree. And then when I realized they're all sort of hazel, ash, holly, cherry, they're all have personalities, and a lot of people are named after trees in Ireland. And of course, we have a big history in Ireland of Ogham, calendar, all the tree alphabet. And it's just such an amazing device for kids to learn about trees and alphabet and everything like that. It really is a fundamental part of being Irish, I think, having a love for trees. And I suppose you start meeting people then that love trees more, and you get more, like, expect your elders and your alders. I kind of came up with that. And I learned how to take cuttings from trees and how easy it is to actually grow trees. So I started collecting acorns and growing my own oaks and stuff. So I've planted, wouldn't be about 10,000. That's my ambition there, Lisa, but it's up around 1,000 anyway on our own farm. So, so that's kind of, I just wanted to kind of highlight that, a tree, the people say, oh, a tree is a tree, like the Sitka is just another tree, but it's not really. That native trees give a lot more to us in terms of habitat and wildlife and everything. So just getting that idea that trees are different, you should differentiate between them. So that was kind of the idea. Yeah.
Mary, there's a question in here. How do we better support women artists or farmers?
Oh, there's a question.
I mean, what a year women, any artists have had in the last year.
Well, that's true. I suppose I would see it as, yes, I wouldn't even divide it up. I'd say any artist, and I suppose it's true for farmers as well. I know that I feel I was very fortunate in that I had a studio attached to my home. I know a lot of artists who would have studios in the city centre. They were locked out of them. They weren't able to go into them. Those that were able to get studios. Also, you're talking in terms of the visual arts in particular. It has been underfunded forever. And very under-resourced in every way. And that's probably what's made people financially very vulnerable. So, I mean, hearing about farmers maybe not getting a fair price for their product, which was something that came up in some of the farm visits as well, saying that the small farmer can't survive today because they're not getting a fair price. Or that they're under threat of survival. That happens with artists as well, and very few, if you try to go full-time at it, you're probably looking at poverty. And then if you try to go part-time, there's that sort of pull between trying to do other jobs. So it is a case of, I suppose, valuing, and again, this would go from both farming and in the case of artists, valuing the role, valuing that the role that they play. I think there sometimes is an invisibility, and I suppose it's just you do have to pay, you do have to fund, you do have to provide resources.
That's what it comes down to, doesn't it, Sheila? You know, at the end of the day, I presume when that question about how do you better support women artists or farmers, it is fundamentally about funding, presumably.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think within arts organisations, to a lot of funding bodies around the world would recognise changes to art practices. So even in funding streams around socially engaged art practice, but more creative ecologists, artists like Breda and Lisa, that are kind of not in traditional visual arts practices, and like myself, we're kind of, well, I often feel a little bit off the radar. I don't know how to describe my art practice, because I do anything that needs to be done. It's the do anything that needs to be done practice, kind of. It doesn't come under different headings of a painter or sculptor, or it's trying to find ways of having conversations, I suppose, or through video or through a workshop, but having to be able to do everything, really. And it can be difficult to access funding when you're not creating a product, or when the end result isn't producing something, because it's all about conversations and slow moves. I don't know.
We're nearly coming to the end, and I'm going to hand it back to Liz now, because the time is nearly running out. Liz, I'm right in saying you want to also hear the Choose Your Challenge suggestions, don't you?
Yes, that'll be great. We'd love to hear from our panelists today as to, if there were one thing, if there were something they could challenge right now, that they could materially change, what might that be? So we'd start with Lisa Fingleton over here she's on the left, on my left. So that's a good place to start, on the left, I think.
I suppose maybe it goes, just because you've just said that now, I'll change what I was going to say. But I think, organisations like Creative Ireland and the Arts Council, I think, are starting to become more aware of what we're calling eco-social art practices. And I think if we could genuinely fund artists with the time and space to create and reconnect with the land, I think that would revolutionise everything. Because oftentimes when we do get the funding, we're so target driven that we're not actually connecting with the land. And I have to say the lockdown has been a great gift. So if I could choose to challenge anything, it's to give artists the time and the space to actually connect with the environment and connect with nature. And I think that will revolutionise everything, because that will allow artists to create the work that needs to be created, to bring about the change around climate action and biodiversity. It'll start feeding that vision that we talked about earlier. But without the time and space and the poverty and the stress, it's very hard to do that. So yeah.
Sheila, what do you think? If there were one thing you could choose to challenge today, what would it be?
Well, Lisa stole my answer. And Lisa, I'm jealous of your 10,000 trees. And then Breda said 1,000 trees, and you're putting me to shame with my my gorilla planting around Newbridge. Sorry, Liz. The one challenge, and I suppose it's could we change the way we see things, in looking at land and thinking, what can it give me? Or what can I take from it? And I know that goes kind of in a way, and I don't mean it as an anti-farming notion, but can we have some kind of philosophy of this is my habitat, and how do I live in harmony with it, and what do I give and receive, kind of thing. So I know it's a little bit idealistic, but I'll throw that one out there.
I can follow on from Sheila, because it relates to both of them. Like what I choose to challenge is exactly, you know, the system we're in now, the system of 100% profit to make a profit at the expense of soil health, our health, you know, the biodiversity, nature, trees, you know, like nothing seems to have a value until it's actually cut. Like a tree doesn't have a value until it's cut down, and stuff like that. So I feel like we're in a system that really isn't nourishing the culture of farming, the farm family, you know, social farming, like, you know, who's going to look after the people in the home, like to keep the family going, keep the, you know, dignity in old age. All that is connected. So I would say choose to challenge the system where I agree with this, the land use. It's not this, I own this and I want to manipulate nature to work for me. It really should be a balance that let nature work for us. And, you know, so I think it could be a chat, you know, for like land trusts, so people can't access to land. If people can't have anyone to pass on the land to, then it maybe go into a public trust or a social trust where people can use it for the benefit of the local area and society.
Mm. Mary Burke, if you could challenge something today for International Women's Day, what would it be?
Well, it's taking up on something Lisa said about time and space for artists. I would put the emphasis on space. Artists are being driven out. As an artist in Dublin, we're being driven out of the city through property prices, and studios, group studios, individual studios, it's practically impossible to get them now. And if you know, you talk about having financing artists and giving them time, but if you don't have a space to make work, you're in trouble. And it's actually at a crisis level at this stage, and that's soaring property prices.
It's a big issue. Ella, do we have some questions?
I think we've gone through all the questions. One question is, Sheila, can you elaborate on your community work in Ballygar?
I suppose over the last 10 years, I would have been kind of, I went on a crusade like a kind of art evangelist, and I was going to bring the arts to everyone in Northeast Galway. And I got involved in setting up a Ballygar Arts Group and more or less occupying Ballygar Town Hall to create art events, be it theatre or be it just ordinary art, visual art workshops, or whatever was going on. I was just trying to support creativity in the community. I would have also started an artist residency space in near Ballygar in Newbridge called Art Farm, which was to more or less bring artists into the area, and more or less with the idea of other voices coming into a place where there wouldn't really be a history of people passing through. So once again, just, you know, to someone else coming in, seeing the landscape or seeing the area and creatively responding to that. So I've been running that space for about 10 years. So
I think that's it, Liz. I don't see any more questions.
Okay, terrific. Okay, so I think it's over to me to say thanks so much, Ella, for your very able handling of this afternoon. These Zoom conversations, we've had so many now, but they're still challenging. It's very challenging it's a very different proposition to be in a room with 4 or 5 people having a conversation to attempting to have the conversation on a screen. So thank you, Lisa Fingleton, Sheila Flanagan, Rita Larkin, Mary Burke especially, who's the reason we're all here, her exhibition providing the context for this conversation. June Danaher is out there somewhere in Shannagolden, where the cold wind from the mountains is obviously blowing her off the screen in this case. So June, we'll catch up with you again. Thanks everybody so much for coming along this afternoon. I just want to say, because I think Catherine Phil McCarthy, the poet, is on the screen here somewhere. I just wanted to make particular reference to the fact that we also have some Limerick connected, Limerick born poets who are from farms or who have farming connections, have also read some poems for us. And that's on the Talking Velvet page on the gallery pages, the Limerick gallery pages. So do check those out, because there really are some beautiful poems, including Catherine's. I won't put you on the spot, Catherine. Maybe you have a poem in your back pocket that you could take out and read for us, it being International Women's Day. Could we persuade you, do you think?
My goodness. Well, I just find something. I thought Mary's interview was terrific, and it was just very insightful. And I also listened to June Danaher, and I thought she gave a great answer to the idea of the challenge, you know, with eco and also social farming and the mix that there is there. I just wanted to ask Mary how visiting farms, I suppose if as a poet you'd say the poem I'm writing is changing. Is the piece of visual art you making changed as a result of the farm visits, or how did you find it, Mary?
I think yes, I think it will change. One of the things that developed out of the farm visits, when I initially visited the farms, I thought I was going to do a combination of the home and the farm, hence the title, and that there might be some domestic interiors as well as out in the fields and the yards. But I was so struck by the vastness, the space, that I concentrated totally on the farms, and the size of my work has increased significantly. So I ended up doing paintings that are maybe 4 or 5 times the size that I would have done before, and I've got a liking for that. So I think whatever project I do next, that will probably follow through. I'll be working bigger, and that's because of the farms. That's directly because of the farms.
Yeah, terrific and beautiful work, and I can't wait to see it. I have a poem called Young Wife, and I wrote it after my mum passed away, but she absolutely loved her job. And I remember asking her one time what was her favourite time, and she said to me she loved it especially when we were younger, so we weren't so challenging. But the time she also loved was getting up first thing in the morning and being the first up and going down to turn in the cows. So this is Young Wife. Cows emerged one by one in dawn fog, dewy coats of colour, Shorthorn, Frisian, Rowan, as if their materiality is contingent on her presence. And the early morning scene in Laughlin's field below the turn, some afterlife from a painting titled Woman and Cows in Heaven. While she stands there, scanning the white drift, senses cold from the ground through her feet, the thin fabric of her dress under a crossover apron covets the life ahead as the world about her sleeps. This freedom of standing alone on a farm of their own before milking, woman of the house, taking stock.
Beautiful. That's beautiful. Thank you.
I think Mary made the point in the interview that artists can feel a bit like farmers. You know, we pay an awful lot of attention to the weather, and we spend a lot of time on our own as well. So anyway, that's...
Thank you so much.
Thank you for asking.
So beautiful. Yeah, that was beautiful. And any of us who've ever been on a farm early in the morning or have ever had anything to do with cows will very much appreciate, and that would very much resonate with us. Thanks again, Ella, Mary, Rita, Sheila, Lisa and Phil and everybody at Limerick City Gallery of Art.